On the night of November 12th, aboard a routine commercial flight crossing the air corridor between Albuquerque and Denver, two veteran pilots encountered something that should not have existed in that airspace. What began as a minor irregularity on the onboard radar, a brief flicker, almost like interference, quickly escalated into one of the most unsettling aviation encounters ever linked to the object now known as 3IATLAS. The existence of the leaked cockpit audio only became public 3 days later, when a maintenance technician responsible for archiving internal training material noticed that one of the recordings had been labeled restricted. That alone was unusual. Commercial pilot communications are rarely classified unless they involve national security, airspace violations, or direct intervention from a federal agency. But the most disturbing detail was not the label, it was the missing 26 seconds. A purposeful cut. A deliberate erasure. Before the technician reported it, he listened twice. Then again. The voices of the two pilots were calm at first, discussing altitude adjustments and a mild crosswind expected near Santa Fe. But that calm slowly deteriorated as a second unknown voice began to bleed faintly through the channel. An interference that did not match civilian frequencies. Emergency channels or known military signatures? The anomaly grew stronger. And then one of the pilots said a sentence that would ignite the entire controversy surrounding 3I Atlas. It's climbing straight up. No aircraft can do that. Moments later, the recording ends abruptly. The technician, unsure of what he had heard, attempted to access the internal file again. But by then, it was already gone, replaced by a standard training module unrelated to cockpit transmissions. The timestamp no longer matched. Someone had overwritten it remotely. When the leak surfaced online, skeptics dismissed it immediately as fabricated audio. But radar logs reviewed by independent analysts showed an object with a vertical acceleration far beyond the limits of any known aircraft. And more importantly, the civilian radar company responsible for that region quietly removed the November 12th dataset from public archives. The incident was now impossible to deny. The aviation community, already on edge due to previous encounters with unidentified aerial objects, began circulating the audio privately. Retired Air Force pilots analyzing the sequence noted that the pilot's references to altitude and vector changes matched real-time aircraft operations. Nothing in the cadence or terminology suggested a hoax. It was authentic, and it was anomalous. The connection to 3IATLAS emerged 2 days later, when an amateur astronomer from Nevada reported that the object's projected trajectory aligned with the exact time and location of the pilot's sighting. According to his calculations, Atlas passed within 40 nautical miles of the aircraft, close enough to be detected by long-range radar, but far enough that no visual confirmation should have been possible. Yet, the pilots did see something. The voice on the leaked audio, cracking under pressure, described a silver arc moving in a manner that defied aerodynamics. No propulsion signature, no wing structure, and no atmospheric drag. When the Federal Aviation Administration was asked to comment, they issued a 2-sentence statement. FAA is aware of the audio circulating online. The agency has no information indicating a threat to civilian aviation, but when pressed about the missing radar data and the altered cockpit file, they declined further comment. Experts in military communications pointed out another disturbing detail. The interference captured in the background of the leak matched encrypted signals sometimes used by high-altitude reconnaissance programs, signals that are not supposed to bleed into civilian channels. Something had been in that airspace. Something that was monitored. Something that was not meant to be heard by the general public. As more information emerged, a pattern began to form. Previous 3IATLAS incidents involved sudden changes in trajectory, unexplained military alerts, and silent high-altitude signatures that temporarily disabled small portions of aviation radar networks. The November 12th recording was not the first time pilots reported impossible maneuvers, but it was the first time the public heard it with their own ears. What happened that night has been picked apart by analysts, debunkers, and government agencies. Yet no one has provided an explanation that fits all the available data. And the missing 26 seconds of cockpit audio remain a blank space, a void that only deepens the mystery. This is the story of what the pilots saw near 3ATLAS. This is the part they tried to erase. The cockpit transmission they never logged, the cockpit recording began like hundreds of others logged on the same route. A calm exchange between Captain Reynolds and First Officer Mitchell, both veterans with more than 20,000 combined flight hours. Their voices carried the routine confidence of pilots who had spent half their lives above the clouds. But at exactly 22 hours, 14 minutes, and 7 seconds, the tone shifted subtly at first, then abruptly, as something appeared on the edge of their forward radar sweep. The instrument panel captured a blip no larger than a grain of dust. It flickered once, vanished, then returned, this time slightly closer, moving against the wind. Mitchell tapped the glass, assuming it was interference from the incoming weather front, but Reynolds froze. He knew that pattern. He had seen it once, years earlier, during joint simulation training with Air Force personnel. It was the kind of signal pilots were trained to ignore because there was never an official explanation for it. He leaned in. "Run a secondary scan," he said. Mitchell activated the backup radar channel, a system rarely used unless the primary unit suffered a failure. But instead of clarifying the anomaly, the secondary sweep made it worse. The contact multiplied 2, then 3 echoes perfectly aligned, moving in unison at a rate no civilian aircraft was capable of matching. The following 10 seconds in the cockpit were almost silent. Only the hum of avionics filled the cabin until Reynolds broke the quiet. "Did ATC mention traffic?" he asked. "No," Mitchell replied. "Skies clear up to 48,000, but whatever they were tracking wasn't. Flying at any altitude normally associated with commercial or military aircraft. According to the radar, the object or objects were positioned above them, climbing and descending at angles the human body couldn't physically withstand." Mitchell switched frequencies, calling Albuquerque Center. "Albuquerque, this is Skyway 274 requesting traffic confirmation northeast of our position. Static." Then a voice distorted, faint responded. Or attempted to. The audio was so warped it was impossible to determine whether the speaker was human or if the transmission was a corrupted bleed from another channel. The interference rose, then abruptly stopped, as if someone had cut the signal mid-sentence. Reynolds glanced at Mitchell. "That wasn't center." Before Mitchell could reply, the blip on the radar made a sudden, violent move. It shot across the display from the left edge to the right in less than a single sweep rotation. Reynolds instinctively checked the horizon outside the cockpit windows. But the night sky revealed nothing unusual, no lights, no streaks, no silhouettes. Yet the instruments insisted something massive was up there. At 22 hours 15 minutes and 2 seconds, the cockpit mic captured a faint vibration. It wasn't from the engines nor from turbulence. It vibrated like a low-frequency hum, mechanical, steady, and unlike any airborne signature the aircraft's sensors were designed to detect. Mitchell spoke first. "Do you hear that?" Reynolds nodded. "Record everything, but they didn't need to." The cockpit voice recorder captured everything automatically. What it failed to capture, or what was later removed, remains the central question of this incident. Over the next minute, the pilots tracked the unknown object as it performed movements that contradicted every principle they had learned in their training. The radar contact shifted from 37,000 feet to 61,000 feet in less than 2 seconds. Then it dropped below their altitude, circled back, and ascended straight upward at a velocity that would have liquefied any known airframe. Mitchell's voice carried a rare tremor when he whispered, "That's impossible." Reynolds didn't answer. He was watching something only the radar could see until suddenly they saw it with their own eyes. A flash. Silent, bright, like a reflection of moonlight off polished metal, except there was no moon above them. The flash appeared for less than a second, far to their right, too fast to identify, too controlled to dismiss. Mitchell leaned forward. "Did you—" "Yes." The radar contact vanished. For 11 whole seconds, the sky was empty. No blips, no pings, no interference. Just clear air and the quiet ticking of altitude indicators. Then the cockpit audio caught the moment everything changed. A thin, high-pitched chirp cut through the channel, followed by a burst of static. From that static emerged a voice calm, male, and speaking so quickly it was impossible to decipher the words. The tone sounded more like a coded transmission than a distress call. Reynolds' eyes widened. "That's military, not ours," Mitchell replied. The transmission stopped abruptly, replaced by a single rhythmic pulse, 5 beats, each spaced precisely half a second apart. Pulses like that didn't appear on civilian frequencies. They were characteristic of encrypted tracking beacons used in aerospace operations, often during classified tests. But there were no authorized tests in their region. Not that night, not at that altitude, and certainly not near commercial airspace. Mitchell reached for the transponder panel to report the anomaly again, but before he could switch frequencies, the object reappeared on radar, this time much closer, no more than 6 kilometers off their right wing. And then it did something neither pilot could explain. It slowed down, not disappeared, not maneuvered. It matched their speed, flew alongside them, held formation like a silent companion. At that proximity, any known aircraft would have been visible. Yet through the cockpit glass, the night sky remained pitch black, with no lights or structures in sight. Only the instruments insisted something was there. Only the recorder captured the escalating tension in their voices. Only the missing 26 seconds erased before the file was leaked to conceal what happened next. For nearly 15 seconds, the unidentified object held a perfect lateral position beside the aircraft, as if studying it. The radar showed it maintaining their exact airspeed down to the decimal, an impossibility, because even advanced fighter jets struggle to synchronize that precisely without visible turbulence or sonic disturbance. Yet the flight remained eerily smooth. Captain Reynolds narrowed his eyes, scanning the darkness. "There's nothing out there," he murmured. "But it's right next to us." The cockpit microphones captured the strain in his voice. A man who had flown through lightning storms and emergency descents was now staring into a void that seemed to be hiding something. Mitchell leaned forward and adjusted the brightness on the starboard side observation light, flooding the wing with a narrow beam. Still nothing. No reflection. No shadow. No silhouette. It was as if the object existed only in the plane's instruments, not in the physical world. Yet the radar insisted otherwise, and the tension inside that cockpit grew thicker with every passing second. At 22 hours, 16 minutes, and 41 seconds, the aircraft's TCA's traffic collision avoidance system issued a proximity warning. The alert was brief, barely a chirp, but enough to confirm one thing. Whatever tracked alongside them was solid. TCAS was designed to detect only physical objects capable of causing collision. Mitchell instinctively reached for the controls, but Reynolds raised a hand. "Don't move. Let it move first." Those words were followed by a sound the airline's technical team would later identify as a remote systems override attempt. A rapid sequence of electrical clicks echoed through the cabin, as if someone or something was sending digital commands directly into the avionics. None of the inputs succeeded, but the attempt itself made the pilots go still. "Did you see that?" Mitchell asked, eyes wide. "I saw it," Reynolds replied. "And we're not the ones doing it." Then, without warning, the radar contact dropped altitude fast. The object descended from their elevation to a position nearly 5,000 feet below and slightly behind them. The sudden movement produced a gap in the radar sweep, a momentary blind spot, before the contact reappeared in an area where nothing should have been capable of climbing so quickly. The cockpit audio captured a deep, low-frequency rumble vibrating through the fuselage. It wasn't engine-related, nor was it weather. It sounded almost like a distant mechanical resonance, like gears rotating or something powering up. Mitchell exhaled sharply. "This is not a conventional aircraft." Reynolds didn't disagree. He simply said, "Log the time." At that moment, the pilots attempted again to reach Albuquerque Center, but the channel was filled with distorted noise like multiple voices speaking simultaneously but out of phase. One voice rose above the others, repeating what sounded like a sequence of numbers. The language was unclear. The cadence was unnatural. The interference ended abruptly when a separate voice, clear and unmistakably human, broke through. Skyway 274, maintain current heading. Do not deviate. But the directive didn't come from a TC. It came from an unregistered military channel. The pilots exchanged uneasy glances. Reynolds pressed the mic button. Identify yourself. Silence. Then a click followed by a disconnection, as if the transmitter on the other end had been forcibly shut down. Seconds later, something flashed outside the cockpit window. Mitchell saw it first, a sharp, thin streak of white-blue light arcing upward from below their altitude. It moved like a tracer, illuminating the edges of the clouds in a clean vertical path. But this wasn't a missile launch, nor atmospheric lightning, nor any known propulsion signature. Reynolds leaned forward. Whatever that is, it's climbing fast. The streak shot past their altitude and continued upward, fading into the sky until it disappeared entirely. The radar showed the unknown contact rising at an acceleration profile that defied every aerodynamic principle. Mitchell swallowed. No aircraft can do that. Before Reynolds could respond, the object returned. This time it didn't appear as a radar blip. It appeared visually. A faint, elongated shimmer like heat distortion materialized just above the right wingtip. At first it was transparent, refracting the sky behind it. Then it thickened into something with shape, not metallic, not reflective. Something closer to a mirage, yet solid enough to influence the aircraft's instruments. The cockpit audio recorded Mitchell whisper, "Do you see that?" Reynolds nodded slowly, eyes locked on the phenomenon. "Keep your eyes on it, but don't make sudden movements." The shimmering form rotated, angling slightly downward before slipping behind the aircraft's right side. The motion was smooth, deliberate, almost curious. At 22 hours, 17 minutes, and 29 seconds, the aircraft's autopilot disengaged on its own. Warning chimes erupted inside the cockpit. Lights flashed. Indicators reset. Mitchell grabbed the controls immediately. "I've got manual," but the plane didn't respond at first. It drifted slightly left, then corrected itself without any input from the pilots. The systems behaved as though there were a third operator, a silent, invisible presence sharing control. For 3 full seconds, the plane flew as if guided by an external hand. Then autopilot re-engaged by itself. Reynolds clenched his jaw. That's impossible. The system can't cycle that fast, but it had. The shimmer outside the window vanished. The radar contact, however, grew brighter, stronger, more resolute. And then it shifted again, moving directly into their flight path before abruptly stopping dead ahead. Reynolds' heart rate spiked. "Altitude hold. Do not climb. Do not descend." The cockpit recording picked up their breathing, now heavy, rigid, controlled only by training. The instrument panel flickered. The airspeed indicator fluctuated. The altitude gauge trembled. Something was affecting the plane's electronics in real time. Mitchell whispered, "What if it's not tracking us?" Reynolds turned slowly toward him. "What do you mean? What if it's guiding us?" Before Reynolds could process that thought, the radar contact suddenly expanded, its digital signature blooming across the screen into a shape the pilots had never seen. A triangular formation, 3 points, perfect symmetry, no transponder, no identification. Then the central point pulsed once, and everything inside the cockpit went dark, the screens, the lights, even the overhead emergency systems. For 5 seconds, the aircraft flew blind. When the power returned, the object was gone. And so were the next 26 seconds of their cockpit recording. The missing audio begins exactly here. When the cockpit systems came back online, everything inside the aircraft appeared normal, almost too normal. The instruments stabilized. The flight path corrected itself. The airspeed returned to standard cruise. It was as if the aircraft had slipped through a brief pocket of non-existence and was now being reinserted into the sky. But Captain Reynolds immediately sensed something was wrong. The aircraft was no longer where it had been. The onboard GPS showed their position nearly 42 miles ahead of where they should have been, as if the plane had skipped forward in time or space. No descent, no acceleration spike, no turbulence. Just a sudden relocation. Mitchell stared at the coordinates. That's not possible. We didn't travel that distance. Reynolds didn't answer. His eyes had drifted to the altitude indicator. They were flying at the correct altitude, but the max altitude alert had logged an impossible spike, 93,000 feet. For a moment, neither man spoke. The cockpit audio captures only the faint whisper of the ventilation system, followed by Mitchell's voice, barely audible. Did we go up there? Reynolds wiped a hand across his forehead. There's no way this aircraft could survive that, but the recorder didn't lie. Something had forced the plane upward in a way the pilots didn't consciously experience, and then returned it to normal flight before the systems came back online. And that's when they both heard it, a metallic click. Not from the cockpit, not from the cabin, but over the radio. A faint channel, one neither pilot had manually selected, opened by itself. The audio contained a single rhythmic pattern, a short burst, a pause, then two longer bursts. Morse-like, but not Morse. The pattern repeated 3 times before dissolving into a low hum. Mitchell swallowed. That's the same frequency we heard earlier. Reynolds nodded slowly. Military. Except it wasn't any U.S. military channel they recognized. Seconds later, another sound bled into the cockpit. It wasn't static, it wasn't interference, it was breathing. Human breathing. Someone on the other side of the transmission was exhaling steadily, almost deliberately, as if they were monitoring the cockpit, listening in real time. Mitchell reached for the transmitter. Identify yourself. The breathing stopped. Then a whisper came through, distorted, compressed, as if spoken through a damaged headset. We see you. The transmission cut instantly. Mitchell jolted. Was that? But his question was interrupted by a new sound, one the airline's audio engineers would later fail to categorize. A deep oscillation vibrated through the fuselage. It wasn't the engines, it wasn't turbulence. It sounded external, like a pressure wave passing through the air around them. Reynolds stared out the front window. Something was there. Not a craft. Not a shape. But a void of distortion in the night sky, a circular region darker than the air around it. The stars behind it seemed to shift, bending slightly as though pulled into its center. The radar identified it as a solid object. The visual sensors identified it as nothing, and yet it moved, slowly, purposefully, aligning itself with the aircraft's nose. The cockpit recording captures Mitchell's trembling voice. What is that? As they watched, the void pulsed once like a heartbeat and then expanded, revealing 3 faint glimmers inside its boundary. Perfectly symmetrical, equidistant. Each glimmer radiated a dull white light. Reynolds' voice dropped to a whisper. That's the same formation we saw earlier. But this time it wasn't on radar. It was directly in front of them. The formation rotated 90 degrees, aligning itself with the aircraft's trajectory. The lights brightened slowly at first, then intensifying until the entire sky ahead of the cockpit glowed with a white luminescence. Then a new transmission cracked through the radio, clean, sharp, and unmistakably authoritative. Skyway 274. Divert immediately. Repeat. Divert now. Mitchell lunged for the radio. Who is this? Identify, but the voice cut him off. This is U.S. Air Force Command. Turn 10 degrees south and descend. You are entering restricted airspace. Reynolds frowned. Restricted? There's no restricted zone on our chart. The voice sharpened. Divert now. You are approaching Object 3IATLA. The moment the name was spoken, the cockpit audio registered a new frequency spike, something powerful, electromagnetic, washing through the avionics like a tidal wave. The lights flickered. The autopilot disengaged. The radar swept violently, unable to stabilize. Mitchell gripped the controls. It's pulling us in. The aircraft began drifting toward the luminous field ahead, though neither pilot applied directional input. It was as if gravity itself had shifted, drawing them toward the formation. Reynolds shouted, "Counter it, bank left." Mitchell attempted to turn, but the control column resisted, fighting his input with a force that felt mechanical, intentional. The object ahead pulsed again. Each pulse corresponded with a jolt through the fuselage, measured, rhythmic, controlled. But then, abruptly, the pull weakened. The luminous formation flickered, its edges distorted, and the entire shape collapsed inward like an imploding star. In its place appeared a single streak of light, thin, bright, razor-sharp, shooting straight upward at a velocity the tracking systems couldn't calculate. It disappeared from sight in less than a second. The aircraft's controls loosened instantly. Mitchell regained full authority over the plane. Reynolds stabilized their heading, and in the silence that followed, the Air Force voice returned, "Skyway 274, maintain radio silence. You did not see that. You will continue to Denver and report no anomalies." The line cut. Mitchell stared at Reynolds in disbelief. "They know about 3i Atlas," Reynolds nodded slowly. "They knew before NASA." The cockpit recording captures the moment the two pilots realized they had witnessed something far beyond a radar anomaly, something the Air Force had actively monitored and concealed. 26 seconds of the recording, from the moment the object aligned with their nose to the device's final upward launch, were later found deleted, overwritten by a remote command. The airline's technical team never recovered the missing audio, but the surviving fragment, breathing, a whisper, and the Air Force's forced diversion was enough to confirm the truth. The pilots had made direct contact with 3i ATLAS. Not an echo, not a radar glitch, not a rumor, a real object. A controlled object. An object being tracked long before NASA ever acknowledged its existence. And for reasons unknown, someone wanted that encounter erased.